Hello, my name is Chuck Cannon, and I'm the Director for the Center for Tree Science at the Morton Arboretum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this presentation about accessing and conducting research in the forest canopy. This presentation is part of an effort to pull together a community of researchers who are interested in developing effective and accurate tools to overcome some of the major challenges that we face in studying and managing trees. This idea has long been a dream of mine, and I feel that we're getting so close to some major technological breakthroughs and some stunning new discoveries enabled by these tools. The presentation consists of three parts. As a first step, Colby Borchetta, a research assistant in the Center for Tree Science at the Morton Arboretum, and I will present some of the results from the first two surveys that we sent out. The second part of the presentation is focused on current advances in drone-based techniques for collecting samples from the tops of trees. The team at DeLeaves will be talking about the state of the art from that perspective. And I apologize to Alexi, my colleague there at University of Sherbrooke. My French pronunciation is very bad and I don't want to murder his name. He can introduce himself in his part of the video. Finally, Matt Spinko at the Illinois Institute of Technology will talk about relevant robotics work in his lab and the design process that he hopes to employ to help us discover the common ground that we're seeking and to develop those tools that we want. So let's get started. Thank you very much. So I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about the Morton Arboretum. We're coming up on our centennial now. Next year, we'll be 100 years old. So Joy Morton established the Arboretum in 1922 to study and plant trees for a more beautiful and beneficial environment. For those of you who don't know where we are, we're in the upper Midwest and in the western suburbs of Chicago. And we have a team in the Science and Conservation Department led by Dr. Nicole Cavender. Lydia Scott is the director of the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, and Dr. Murphy Westwood is the leader of the Global Trees Campaign. We have a number of other scientists in the group, and also in the Center for Tree Science, we have a team of scientists, each leading their own lab. And Gary Watson there in the upper left recently retired, but Luke McCormick is our root biologist, Christy Rawlinson is a forest ecologist, Jake Miesbauer is our arboriculture researcher, Andrew Hipp is a systematist, Sean Hoban is a conservation biologist, Megan Midgley is a soil ecologist, and I'm the director for the Center for Tree Science, and I generally think of myself as a tree evolutionary biologist. So given that this is a tree canopy workshop, you'd think I'd have some beautiful shot of the trees from above, right? A beautiful shot of the sunset or something from the top of a tree. But actually, this photo kind of captures my frustrations through the many years of working in forests in Southeast Asia. This is a beautiful forest in central Sulawesi in Indonesia. This was a beautiful spot that we hiked through. I was kind of doing some ground truthing work for a remote sensing survey. And this is kind of lower montane forest, very little visited by people, very mature old growth forest. And I only spent a day here and I kind of walked through. And this is the ground view of a forest. I mean, this is what we confront. This is, the big stems and boles of big trees. And so it's really difficult to get a sample here. And imagine if I had had some kind of tool where I could quickly get samples, I probably could have described 15 new species just in that one day if I could have just walked through here and grabbed stuff. But, that's long ago. Hopefully this forest still exists, But those kinds of frustrations kind of led me to write a letter once to Science Magazine. So you're probably all familiar with the Curiosity rover that went to Mars. Incredible engineering feat of putting that thing on the surface, and it's a self-powered autonomous laboratory roving around gathering samples and things. And it just kind of struck me as like, we know there's life in the canopy. We know there's a lot going on there that we can't access, and I really think we need a curiosity moment. And I wrote this in 2012. I've been thinking about this for decades, and this is just something I really think should be more of a focus in our biological research. And I also want to emphasize that this isn't just drone-based tools that we're talking about. We are not focused on that. It is something that is a big part of what we present today and discuss, but we want to step back and really think about the problems that we're facing and what is the best way to do this. And drones definitely won't always be the right answer. Maybe most of the time they won't be the right answer. So we're thinking broadly about this, and we want you to think about it broadly in the same way. So the motivations for this workshop, I think it's pretty obvious to all of us. The tree canopy is a vast, largely unexplored terrestrial ecosystem. I'd like to actually make an estimate for the total volume of canopy space on Earth for the manuscript, and like think about, we talk about hectares of forest being lost, but how many cubic miles or so of canopy space have we lost when those forests are cut down? And we know it harbors an enormous amount of specialized biodiversity. All those samples, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits, they're all critical components of understanding tree biology and getting those samples that we need to identify them, to diagnose diseases, to get specimens for DNA or different kinds of gene expression analyses, for morphometric analyses, all kinds of stuff that we need those samples. And I'm talking selfishly about trees. I know there's a lot of you out there that might have other things you want from the tree canopy. So we didn't want to limit this to the discussion of academic research only. We want people from many different perspectives who are looking to gain access to tree canopies, from arborists, production foresters, city managers. I think we can find a lot of common ground between basic and applied research. And we're confronting the same problems. And so we can both benefit from advances in this field. So the objectives here, we want to bring together a community of biologists, tree care professionals, and engineers to gain better and more efficient and precise access to tree canopies. And to do that, we want to begin the process of identifying and prioritizing common problems and challenges. And we want to define the functional requirements that we need for those tree canopy tools. And then eventually we hope to publish an article that describes the community of researchers that are accessing tree canopies, and also define our priorities and challenges and our future strategies for going forward. We want to publish that later this year. And we want to kind of initiate an ongoing exchange of ideas and experience in the community, and so we can all learn from that. So we conducted 2 surveys to gain information about how the community wants access to tree canopies, what are the current interests, and what are your past experiences. So that was sent out as an initial invitation on several different email lists and things. We used the International Canopy Network's emailing list, listservs like ecology and evolutionary listservs, sent it out through several social media channels and so forth. And it was about 5 pages long through SurveyMonkey, had a total of 26 questions, and 218 people responded in the very first survey. And so I was impressed that there is actually really an interest out there, and 117 of those people indicated they're interested in further participation. So it's a very robust response, and there's obviously a high level of interest in gaining access to tree canopies. So in the first question is like asking what your interest is. And so most people want to study the tree itself, or study things that are associated with the trees. This isn't always the living things on the trees. People are interested in other, kind of microclimate, fogs, other kind of effects that the tree canopy has on the atmosphere and gas exchange and that kind of stuff. So there is a range of people also interested in managing and caring for trees, and it's a small percentage. Also with engineers, we invited engineers to participate in this as well. So we have a few here today. And a couple of people in the other category said that they were canopy access professionals or educators. And in the second survey that we're going to talk about as well, the composition of the response didn't really change much. So these kind of relationships are pretty much holding when we go to the second survey as well. How are you employed? Most people at universities, but there's a healthy number at nonprofits and at government agencies. And a surprising number, to me anyway, that people were self-employed and really would like to have access regularly to tree canopies, some working for private companies. And so it's a very interesting mix of people. Like I said, we don't want just academics, we want to touch upon the needs of applied uses as well. Most people are from the US as well. And where do you work? Although there were a number from Europe, Germany, France, also Mexico, Canada, China, Australia. And there were a long list of countries about 1 or 2 people were responding from. What is the focus of your job? Most people are involved in research, either full-time or part-time. And there's a healthy number of students. And I assume that those are people who are kind of planning on becoming researchers later on, or at least continuing to associate with research. And so most people are, research is a big part of their job. And arborists, probably for some arborists, they're very interested in improving their service to customers or improving their understanding of what is going on with the tree, particularly early on in its decline. So there's arborists and some other roles there too. And So again, two people identified as educators, and there was another professional tree climber as well. Trees are being studied all across the landscape. So natural forest was the majority of the responses, but there's almost equal representation of trees in parks and reserves, mixed in natural managed forests, public lands, protected lands, private lands, cities and suburbs. And then we kind of get into the really applied areas, the plantations and agriculture and industrial landscapes. So, we have a very healthy range of landscapes that are represented in this. And so we're trying to access trees, not just in tropical rainforest, but also on your city street. And so those represent different kinds of challenges, different kinds of opportunities. So I think it's a really nice mix of where trees are growing that we want to try to access. How do you currently access the canopy? Most of you use a slingshot or a rifle or climb the tree yourself with ropes. A fair number were picking up material off the ground. A number were using the drone just for imaging or remote sensing and not actually grabbing anything from the tree. People use ladders and scaffolds. They hire professional climbers or use a cherry picker or hydraulic lift. Some fell the tree. I assume that's being, the tree needs to be brought down anyway, so they're taking that opportunity to get something from the canopy. Although in the past, a lot of the earlier explorers, like Eduardo Beccari in Borneo, there's a passage in his book where he has a team and they're just cutting down trees all day long in tropical, virgin forests in Borneo. And that's how he's getting all those great samples. We can't do that. We don't want to do that. So we need better tools than that, better tools than an axe, right? So also there's a small number that are using a crane, gaining access from above, the canopy cranes. There were a number of interesting comments in the other category. 23 respondents suggested things like they're using canopy cameras from the ground or using canopy walkways. And one person even said that they resorted to studying understory and subcanopy things just because of the accessibility. They really wanted to study things in the tree tops, but they couldn't do it. Some, daredevils climb without ropes, kid style. That's dangerous. I wouldn't advocate that. Or they use a compressed air cannon and to shoot a line over, I suppose. Use drones for line setting as well. Fogging to, drop down insects or whatever biota you're interested in. Mylar balloons, pocket chainsaws, and even using a drone as a weed whacker to chop off branches. You probably have to buy a lot of propellers that way. But also there was kind of an inventive person who had their own homemade system of chopping small leafy branches down. But they say that doesn't work all the time. So in the next set of questions, we asked kind of how challenging is the access? And we had a sliding scale you could choose from 0 to 100, kind of whether you agree or not. So we asked people, how limited is access? Most people reported that they have limited access to the canopy. Luckily, some people say, 20% said that they really weren't having much of a problem accessing the canopy, but most people were having limited access to the canopy. Can you get the necessary samples? Fortunately, most of us can. The majority of people said that they can get the samples they need, but then there's a fair number of people who said that's very difficult, and even 22 respondents said that it was impossible for them to get those samples. Is the sample determined by your collection method? It's, about the same. Some people said definitely yes, they were limited by the collection method, and then some said they have total control. So there's kind of right in the middle is the mode where most people said. Does collection take too long? Most people said, yes, it takes too long. And also, is your collection time sensitive? Most people said, yes, it's very sensitive. And this is kind of the most majority. People are saying that, yes, they want to do it quickly and easily, and they need better access. And I think this result too, from two questions, question 8 and question 17, is one of the most convincing to me. So on the left is the question of how often do you access, so some people say seasonally, some people say routinely, most say never or through very intense brief periods, and a few say never. But when you ask the question, if you had the perfect tool, how often would you access the canopy? And you can see it really changes. People would routinely access the canopy if they could. They continue to do it seasonally or in those kind of episodic periods when they really want to do it on demand, and the never almost goes away completely. So we obviously have a desire, a need for better tools to access the tree canopy. So these were just some highlights from the initial survey. We'll comprehensively go over these in analysis for the manuscript. Kobe Borchetta, the research assistant at Morton Arboretum, he's going to present some results from the second survey and include some comparisons between the two surveys that we made. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Chuck, for the introduction. My name is Kobe Borchetta, and I work at the Morton Arboretum within the Center for Tree Science. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the results from the second survey that we sent out. Okay, so a little overview. We sent the second survey out to try to get a little more details on what, where, why, how people are sampling, what they're doing, and secondly, to get more information on what people would like to do, maybe a little bit of the what ifs. So this survey contained 5 open-ended questions prompts. We had about 50 people. So yeah, roughly 250 responses minus a few that didn't respond to some of the particular questions. So let's dive in. The first prompt was briefly explain the details of the samples / observations you need to obtain from the tree, including the tree species, where these trees grow, and the field conditions. Highlight where these samples are located on the tree, top, within, long major branches, and trunk, etc. All right, so it's a loaded question, so we're going to break it down a little bit. First, we're going to kind of pull out, what people are sampling. This was something that we asked in the first survey, but in this survey, we were hoping to kind of get more details on kind of what people are doing out there. But as you can see, we have 100 responses from 50 people, so most people had at least a couple things that they were collecting or observing, measuring, and you can see leaves and branches, consistent with the first survey as well. Most people are just collecting leaves and branches. But we also have seed, flower, and fruit coming in around 5% each, epiphytes at 9%. We lumped insects, pests, fungi, and microbes together at 8%. Digital, which included images, or if you're getting photosynthetic rates or other kind of measurements, electronic kind of equipment. Observations at 11%, and we had one person that was collecting tree cores. So a little bit, some detail about the sampling. Most people, not most, I mean, a lot of people were were pretty flexible on when and where they could sample, but there were quite a bit that had some type of conditions, the timing or the phenophase timing, fruiting, flowering, emergent crown, pre-dawn water potential, or had to be leaves that are sunlit or shade, stuff like that. So they definitely want to keep these things in mind, as we're thinking about solutions and thinking about how we're currently doing things. So a little bit on the sample location. So about where in the tree. So there's 2 charts on this slide. The first one's the pie chart of the responses, pre-distributed over these categories we made up: top, outer, within, trunk, branches, and then I'll put another one called multiple strata. Essentially, some people were specifically interested in kind of knowing what's going on at different levels and getting samples from each of those levels. But the chart on the right is a similar one from Anderson et al., where they kind of broke the tree up into 4 zones. Similar to mine, maybe kind of combine a couple here and there. But the first zone being the main stem, the second being the mid branch, the third being like the outer and tips, the top basically, and then the fourth being the space between trees. So yeah, we definitely have people kind of mention these 4 zones explicitly. And then the colors on their chart kind of indicate, how often, or their experience with those different zones. So the reds means that they rarely or never go there, and then the green means that they can, they feel comfortable going there alone or without supervision, and then the yellow and orange represent kind of they would go there with a climber. So you can see, most people, and but you can look at both charts and be like, yeah, people want and need to pretty much get within the whole canopy, and it's important that we're able to do that, and not be limited, which I'll talk a little more about those in a minute. But yeah, we got to be able to move around, get up in the tree, move around, and be precise about how we're collecting our samples and what we're doing. Definitely important stuff to think about. So why are people doing this? Why are people collecting samples? What's their interest? What's their purpose? We broke it down to 10 categories. Insects, pest, pathology got lumped into one. And that was the highest category. And second, we know a lot of people like to sample leaves. So leaf traits and chemical analysis or morphometrics is another big one as expected. But we also have DNA genetics at 9%, herbarium general collection at 6%, biodiversity, phenology, conservation coming in, roughly a fifth, 20% total between those three, and then environmental microclimate that kind of lumped people who are interested in measuring pollution and or microclimate parameters like temperature, humidity, stuff like that. And then the last two categories, the general, other, that was kind of anybody that pretty much didn't give me enough information to really put them in any of these categories, and without making too much assumptions of what they're trying to do. And then the epiphytes, like similar, I didn't really have enough information to really know exactly what their purpose was or the interest really was. So I just kind of left that as its own category since it was a sizable chunk. But yeah, you can see 68 responses out of 50 people. So most people have one or two interests that they're looking into. And we have a nice widespread of interest and purposes and reasons why we're out there, which makes sense. Even at the Morton Arboretum here, we have we look into all these things between all the labs we have here. So a little more on the tree species. Many people did indicate, specifically that they're interested in this species or that species or this genus or maybe this family and anything within this family. But there are also plenty that pretty much said, yeah, hundreds, too many to count. So by no means is this a comprehensive list, but I hope you can see, you get at least a visualization of kind of what people are studying, and the bold ones indicate ones that were mentioned multiple times. So the where, this one was answered in a couple of different contexts. The first being kind of more the global location, as you can see, kind of just made a quick map here, just kind of see, at least a visual indication of kind of where people are doing their research or their work. And the other context was kind of just more the setting, whether it's, islands or the swamp, orchards, stuff like, etc. To go along with that further, from the first survey, this table is from, you can see it was kind of broken down at tree type. So the colors represent evergreen, forest, mixed forest, deciduous, broadleaf, or conifer. And you can see subtropical, tropical, and temperate regions. So even with the second survey, most people were in the tropical or subtropical regions. And you can see evergreen and mixed forest were pretty popular answer choices. And even if you break it down by rainfall, so a lot of tropical, subtropical, and seasonal and wet environments was probably the most, although seasonal and temperate was the largest value we had. But just kind of show you a little bit on distribution about where, on what people are doing. The field conditions, so real quick, just, there's some things that were mentioned, that they had to go to remote locations, or they had to endure, challenging terrain. They had to get samples from cliffs, the sediment's still soft, muddy, slippery. And then, of course, weather conditions. I think we all have to deal with those in some capacity, especially I know here at the Arboretum, flying drones, it's something that it's one of the most important things, going out there. So that kind of leads to the next question is the challenges. What is currently the biggest barrier or limitation you face in obtaining the samples you need? So basically boils down to what's your challenge and to getting what you need. And you can see a pretty good spread among the first four categories. So canopy access, tree height, tools ability, money, time account for most of the responses, but among others, safety, vandalism, precision, and terrain go in there. And of course, there's a lot of overlap between these. I think we all can agree that money and time kind of factors into, how many abilities we have in the lab or the tools we have available to work with. Maybe it's because of money and time that we don't, have canopy access, because otherwise we would have got the training or whatever it is to do that. But nonetheless, it's good to see, the stuff kind of compiled a bit and kind of, let everybody know we're all dealing with these challenges, and, it is significantly impacting, what, the work we're doing. As Chuck mentioned earlier, if they had, a tool that would enable them to do their work, they would be out there much more often. So keep that in mind. Just to expand on that a little more, a lot of what we heard was just limitations of the current methods, the classic methods that people are using. Most people indicated that, they were, use a pole pruner, they're climbing, they're using a slingshot. Some people had the cranes, not very many, obviously, because it's quite expensive. But there's the challenges, kind of all combined. Having to carry equipment, or something fails, you don't have power. So it's something that you gotta think about. The all these different limitations kind of can stack up on you, and generally kind of make sampling and studying trees quite difficult. So that kind of leads to transition to kind of the second kind of objective is kind of just seeing what people would like to sample. So the what if. So if you could place a sensor or instrument in the tree, what would you measure? How precisely do you wish to place it? How long would you leave it in place? So I'm going to head and just kind of touch on the first part of this question, and you can see kind of what people would like to do if they could place a sensor in the tree. So a lot of people would like to pretty much measure kind of environmental parameters between microclimate and pollution monitoring. It's like 50% people would like to just put some basic monitoring equipment in a tree and get some measurements that way, which is totally possible and accessible these days. Maybe it needs a bit more developing to kind of make it accessible to everybody and make it in a platform that's that makes sense for the conditions and all. But yeah, you see, even phenology and monitoring insects and pollinators, that would essentially involve putting a camera into a tree. So a lot of what people want to do are it's possible. I mean, it's within reach. I think I think most people would agree with that. But then you see kind of the chemical and leaf branch measurements. Those ones might be a little harder to kind of develop or innovate. To a tool that can do those kind of things. But nothing's possible, right? So yeah, just to kind of wrap it up before I hand it back off to Chuck, and kind of going back to kind of what he was saying in the beginning. We've all been out there in the forest, in the field. Like, man, I really wish I could have this or do that, or if I had a tool that could do that. Or there's a lot of situations where we could recall probably among us that we thought some of these things, and as an engineer, it's one of the fun things to do is kind of think about solutions, or just think of wacky ideas, or just have fun getting creative and think of different ways we can solve some problems, even if it is kind of ridiculous. But some things that pop out to me, just which is kind of the purpose of the whole workshop, is it's going to highlight this and try to get conversation started. Improving our remote capabilities, whether that's from a drone, or or telemetry systems. If we're trying to put sensors in trees, we got to be able to get that data easily and retrieve our sensors, possibly retrieve the data for sure. Access to just tools and resources, and thinking about safety for a lot of this stuff. So access to be able to do our work safely. And then aside from we want to create new tools and be innovative and have these advanced technology in the tree world. But there's still a lot that's said about what we can just improve what we got already, or just maybe develop some tools or kind of to assist to make these tools a little more accurate, a little more easy to use, portable, whatever it is. Tailored to the specific need more, that would make them a little more effective. But yeah, that's about it. I just want to touch on that briefly, and thanks for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Alexis Lucie-Lesbier, and I'm happy to be here to present on drone-based canopy sampling techniques. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Sherbrooke. I work on developing novel drone application, particularly for monitoring and sampling hard-to-reach environment like forest, cliffs, underground mines, and high-voltage electrical lines. I'm presenting today for The Leaf, a startup that was co-founded by Guillaume Charon and Hugues Lavigne to commercialize the sampler that they developed in the lab. The team has been growing since then, and they are recruiting if anyone is interested. That being said, the purpose of the presentation is to show the latest advance in drone-based canopy sampling. So let's get going. To start, you can see here a few techniques currently used to sample the canopy. People have been using pole pruner, climbers, line launcher, and shotguns. I won't go into too many details, as you probably know these techniques better than we do. However, it seems that all of these techniques have some drawbacks and are somewhat limited when sampling very tall trees. In these cases, other techniques are often used. These include lifts, helicopters, cranes, and canopy raft. All of these techniques are unfortunately expensive, and they represent major infrastructure to deploy and maintain. That's one of the main reasons why various drone-based canopy sampling methods have emerged all around the world since 2016. There seemed to be a clear need for better way to sample trees. The system developed include razor blade installed on drones to pull leaves out of the tree, spring-loaded shears suspended under a drone, different saw suspended under drones, and robotic arms installed on drones. It is important to note that there is not a lot of information available on all of these systems, and and most of what we know is from looking at heavily edited video. And these videos make us doubt of the functionality of many of these systems, unfortunately. To our knowledge, the only project that have been used to collect samples successfully in the field are the LEAF and the FTTS from ETH Zurich. We know that there is a more recent version of this system also. I don't have enough time to go into the details of all of these systems, but developing a drone-based canopy sampling sampler is quite challenging, and I will discuss some of these challenges. These challenges are described in detail in the paper below. I will summarize them quickly here. The principal challenge involved the successful integration of the sampler onto the drone without negatively affecting the drone dynamics or the autopilot. Branch sampling is also a challenge, as many actuators need to be controlled simultaneously, and any failure could result in the sampler getting stuck into the tree. The sampling mechanism must also work on a number of different species, which mean different branch orientation and canopy structure. This can rapidly become quite a complex puzzle to solve. Another point of consideration is that these systems are often teleoperated. However, radio range can be drastically reduced by the leaf of trees, especially the water in those leaves that block the radio signal. Low latency is also critical for seamless teleoperation, and sufficient image quality is necessary to identify the sample of interest and the specific branch that we might want to collect. Another important challenge for these systems is the safety. Obviously, flying close to trees can lead to contact and crashes. And operating a drone in such condition can be quite stressful even for a very experienced pilot. Sampling is also subject to prop wash that will move the branches. Similarly, wind is a concern, and obviously in real life you would like to operate your system in regardless of the weather conditions. Finally, the precision is critical to sample the branch at different locations around the tree, or to sample a specific branch of interest, like branches with cone or with specific damage that you want to study. Sufficient control is necessary in that case to follow the branch motion in the wind, and the oscillation of a suspended sampler must be limited to for efficient operation of the system. We've been addressing many of these challenges since 2017, and finding the right combination of technology demanded a lot of iteration. The project started in partnership with the University of British Columbia Botanical Garden. We were tasked to design a system to collect canopy sample during their field expedition in Vietnam. We started with a very simple prototype made mostly of the shelf component. The sampler, however, quickly evolved, and 5 generations later, we now have a version sufficiently advanced for commercialization. The current system is made of a saw at the bottom with 2 grippers, one to feed the branch into the saw, and another one to hold the sample after it's cut. The saw can cut branch with stem diameter up to 20 millimeter. This typically represents a branch of less than a meter long and 1 kilogram in weight. The system also includes an onboard computer full HD video camera, and a long-range radio system for teleoperation. The sampler can be adjusted to different orientation to sample either deciduous or conifer tree, branch either horizontal or vertical or any angle in between. Finally, the sampler is suspended by a rod that can reach up to 5 meters in length. This helps to keep the drone high above the tree, and it reduces the pilot stress. Commercial drone like the DJI M200 and M600 can be used without any modification to fly this system. To control the system, a special design remote controller is included. This controller displays the view from the camera with information like the battery level, the radio signal strength, and the cutting sequence state. The controller is also used to trigger a fully automated cutting sequence that can be activated at the push of one button. The system is easy to carry, easy to deploy, and easy to use. It comes in a Pelican case, and the drone, the sampler, and the ground station can be set up in 5 minutes on any forestry road. One operator typically fly the drone, while the other operator control the sampler. I invite you to follow this YouTube link right here to see the system in operation. Typical operation involve choosing a target, flying to the target using either GPS coordinate or manual flight, using the onboard camera to select a branch of interest on the tree that interests us, approaching the branch with the sampler and triggering the automated cutting sequence, flying away with the sample to return either land near the base station or release the sample from the air for faster operation. To give you a better idea of what we can do, I will present very quickly 3 missions that we completed in the last few years. One of the first sampling mission that we done was with the University of British Columbia Botanical Garden during their field expedition in Vietnam. We use a smaller version of the system to facilitate hiking in the mountains. And in that case, the leaf allow for fast access to difficult to reach sample, either high up in the canopy or across river and valley. Another sampling campaign that was also performed with the National Ecological Observatory Network in 2019. This network has 40 locations across the US that they use to monitor the effect of climate change. They perform periodic canopy sampling at these locations, and we participate in a sampling campaign at the Wind River Experimental Forests in Oregon. We collected samples from a dozen of 40-meter tall Douglas fir, Western hemlock, and silver fir. On average, it took us 7 minutes to collect samples that were up to 140 meters from the road. As you can see, you can see the flight path on the top right image right here. Finally, last summer, we performed a sampling campaign with the Canadian Airborne Biodiversity Observatory. This group uses airborne spectral data to assess land use change, climate change effects, and invasive plant population. In their project, they need to calibrate their model with canopy sample, and they wanted to investigate the effect of the sample location. Typically, the polepreneur can reach the mid canopy, while the leaf can easily reach the branches that are most visible by airborne imagery. The analysis of the sample from 10 maple trees found functional and spectral difference in the leaf collected. The results are published in the article below. You might wonder at this point if it's difficult to use such system. Well, the first step is to get your pilot license and develop basic flying skill. This can typically be done through widely available courses that last between 2 and 5 days. Once you have that background, we can train you remotely to use the leaf system. The training typically lasts a few hours, and you should become quite proficient at sampling tree branches after a few more days of practice. That's all for me. I hope I was able to demonstrate how useful drone can be to sample the canopy. We are really excited about the idea of seeing the leaf being used by you guys all around the world. We are also working on other projects, including a project with the National Tropical Botanical Garden and the National Geographic. This project aimed at sampling recently rediscovered species on steep Hawaiian cliff, including the Ibiscadelphus woody. For this purpose, we are developing two completely different sampling platforms, and we hope that we can also find other use for these systems. More generally, we would love to hear more about your needs, either for the current Leaf platform or for any other crazy idea that you might have in mind. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Welcome. I'm Professor Matthew Spenko, and I'm the director of the robotics lab at Illinois Tech. I'm going to begin this talk by just introducing you to Illinois Tech and where I'm from, because my guess is that most of you don't know who we are. We are a small PhD granting private institution on the south side of Chicago that focuses on engineering, science, architecture, design, and law. In this picture, you can see our campus, which has the L train running through it, as well as the skyline of downtown Chicago a couple miles to the north of campus. And before we start getting into robotics and its potential for tree science, I want to show you a little bit about what we do in my lab to sort of get you thinking about some of the potential that might be there. My hope is that it spurs some creativity for the exercise that we're going to do at the end of this talk. And so one of the things that I work on is gecko-like and electrostatic adhesives. These are controllable adhesives in that we can turn them on and off, and they have a number of advantages over other solutions such as suction or electromagnetism. And I'd be happy to get into the details if you want at some other time, but for right now we're just going to stick with some of the basics here. And what happens is that these gecko-like adhesives are turned on with a shear load. So you can see here in this video, none of those pads were adhesive. We applied a shear load to them through a tendon mechanism, and we were able to pick up that glass substrate. We then turn it off, and we can easily remove the gripper from the substrate. We have that same solution, we have an electrostatic solution that's being applied to this climbing robot that we built in collaboration with our partners at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so in this example here, we have a robot that's climbing up 3 different surfaces: glass, wood, and then drywall. We've taken both of these technologies and we've applied them to other solutions, such as this robotic gripper. So this is a soft gripper that is going to grasp a large number of objects here. So it's soft in the sense that all of those fingers on it, there's no rigid materials in there. And we have these electrostatic and gecko-like adhesives there to increase the adhesion pressure. And what it does is it allows us to pick up these other objects. This is an example here of the high-tech. It is a combination terrestrial and aerial robot. And so this is this solution right here, this hybrid terrestrial and aerial quadrotor. You can see here in its terrestrial form, it's rolling on the ground, but it also has the ability to lift off of the ground and to fly. And this allows us, this rolling cage here allows us to control the vehicle with both its, with one actuator set. So we can control both forms of locomotion, aerial and terrestrial, with one set of actuators and one set of control electronics. And we've been able to show that the high-tech is about 6 to 7 times more energy efficient. It has 6 to 7 times the range than a traditional aerial-only quadrotor. And that is because this high tack has the ability to roll on the ground so it can move forward without having to exert so much energy when it hovers. On the flip side, if you think about this as a terrestrial robot, when the robot wants to avoid an obstacle, so in this situation here we have the robot rolling on the ground, it wants to move over an obstacle here, and it simply flies over the obstacle. So the inset on the lower right is just an example there of a video feed coming from the robot itself. We've taken the same sort of technology, our use in the grippers that I showed you in the beginning, along with our UAV technology or our drone technology, and we've been able to develop these drones that are able to perch onto vertical surfaces. So in this example here, you can see those same dry adhesive pads, those gecko-like adhesives, and that same gripper. It has some additional features there, some force sensors that allow us to know when to grip and when not to grip. But it has this ability to perch, which is very useful if you wanted to say, place a sensor on a vertical surface, windows in this case, but potentially think beyond that, think trees, think trunks of trees, stuff like that. And then when we want to, we can release from the surface and fly away. Some of our more modern robots deal with soft robots. So again, I talked a little bit about that idea of that soft gripper. This is an example here of a soft robot, a larger mobile robot that has the ability to move, in this case, shrink and to sort of move inside of this corridor. And you can think of this as analogous to maybe an amoeba or a paramecium, where the outer portions of that animal have the ability to move along or exert loads on the environment, and move throughout the environment. And the inside of this structure are passive granules. And this allows us to jam the system and shift from a robot that's compliant and configurable to a rigid system that can impart relatively large forces on the environment. This is another example of such a robot, slightly different actuation mode that we use in this one. And you can see here it moving around its environment, and eventually what we do is we get it to, in this object following, we can actually get it to grasp the object and then pull on that object as well. All right, so everything that I showed you up to now basically deals with robots in controlled environments. And that's not really what this workshop is concerned about. This workshop is concerned about moving beyond laboratory into what is termed field robotics, or robotics in the outdoors environments, or more generally, robots operating in environments that aren't prepared in any sort of way. This is an example of some of our work that we've been doing in collaboration with the Mortimer Arboretum, this is an example here that we're trying to do some leaf sampling. We're using the leaves sampler, and the video right here, we're trying to track a leaf. So we're trying to autonomously find a leaf on a tree, and then autonomously track it, and then sample that particular leaf. Try to do this as opposed to being teleoperated in its current form, move to a more autonomous process. And it works. We're in the preliminary stage, and it works somewhat in some leaves sometimes, but it doesn't work in all environments. You can imagine that the different types of trees offer different challenges, and that's a common issue with field robotics. The environments can vary widely, including different lighting and weather conditions, and that can really affect your algorithms. All right, so I want to transform or transition now away from what we do in the lab, my lab, and sort of teach you a little bit about the design process. And we're going to use this design process in the workshop to try to understand and get a better idea of what issues you guys are facing. So I want to teach you a little bit about the design process, and then we can use that to move forward. So it starts with identifying the problem, trying to understand what the underlying goal is of what we want to do. After that, we develop the functional requirements. These are sort of the metrics by which we are going to evaluate our solutions. We then generate concepts, and this is my favorite part of the design process. This is where we get a brainstorm and come up with all the different solutions that we can find that might solve this particular problem, might meet these functional requirements. We then perform analysis, which may be detailed, may be just back of the envelope. Do these concepts work? Or maybe we develop models that help us generate even more concepts by understanding the underlying mathematics and the underlying models behind what we're trying to do. We then identify the risks and countermeasures. So risks associated with each one of those solutions and countermeasures that we might use to alleviate those risks. And this part of the process is not necessarily clean, right? We are moving stuff around, we're going back and forth, we're developing models, we're generating more concepts. Based on that, we see what risks there might be. And so it's a little bit of messy, and I don't want to imply that this is a linear process in any means. And that's okay. That's just sort of how it works. After that, we evaluate the concepts. We generally build prototypes. And then we move back into the sort of this cycle, the design cycle. Repeat. Okay? And so let's focus here a little bit here on identifying the problem. All right? Identifying the problem. This is fundamentally what we want to do. And this is not necessarily easy. Okay? So you may say, all right, well, I want to develop a robot that goes and sample leaves for me because I want to measure such and such chemical analysis of the leaves. Well, that's not really the fundamental problem because you're assuming a solution already. You're already assuming that a robot is going to go and sample these leaves for you. What I want to understand, what I want us to get to, is what is that actual fundamental problem? Is that I want to sample the chemical composition of a leaf, the same leaf, 3 times a day over a 10-day period. Maybe that is exactly what you want to do. And so the solution may be a robot that goes and samples the leaves and returns it, or maybe it's a robot that brings the sensor, the instrumentation, to the leaf itself. So we don't actually cut any leaves down at all. So it's hard. It's not necessarily easy. Most people already automatically assume some sort of solution. And what we want to get to is finding what that underlying, that fundamental problem is that you want to solve. It's sort of like that famous quote by Henry Ford who said, if I asked people what they'd wanted, they would say a faster horse. All right? So we don't want to develop the faster horse. We want to find out what that underlying, that fundamental issue is that you have, that you want to go from one, Henry Ford wants people to go from one place to another faster. And there's different solutions out there that we may be able to find to solve those issues. All right. Going back to the design process, the next part that we want to focus on is developing the functional requirements. All right. These are the design specifications, the things, the stuff that needs to get done. And typically, when I do this when I ask this out of my students, I say, all right, let's identify the functional requirements. And they say things that are in general, people who are new to this process say things that are in general, say it's, that are sort of vague. We don't want vague at this step. We want specific. So saying things like, well, I want to sample as many trees as possible. I want it to be easy to use. I want low operating costs. I want to, not damage trees. Well, those are all good things, but we don't know exactly what those mean. We don't know what does it mean to have operational. What are your operational costs? What is your budget? What do you really need out of sampling? And so we don't want to do this. Instead, we want to develop metrics, things that we can evaluate our solutions against. So instead, we might say like, hey, we need to sample at least X trees in Y amount of minutes. Or we need this to be operational for so many hours a day. And the sample cost has to be under a certain value. And we may get these wrong. We may go back and change this as we sort of move on in the process. But we really want to get to that point. It says, all right, at what point would you give up on this solution? All right, if you could only sample one time a day, is that not enough? 2 times a day, 10 times a day? Let's find out where your pain points are and see where those limits of them are. All right, so that's what we want to do at the end of this workshop. We want to we want to be able to focus on the first 2 steps of the design process. And we want to learn about what your fundamental problems are in the field and what requirements might be to make your job easier or just better. So maybe it's not just sampling what you currently sample faster or cheaper, maybe it's sampling something entirely new, some different thing that's going to allow you to do your research, do your conservation, to do your work better than you have before.
Okay, before we wrap up, I just wanted to notify everyone that there is a special issue in Frontiers in Forests and Global Change that's now open for submissions. The abstract deadline is January 18th, which is pretty soon this year, and the manuscript deadline is May 18th in 2021. This is organized by a colleague of mine, Aki Nakamura at XTBG, and some other colleagues of his. And so they would definitely be interested in your submissions related to this topic. So the topic is understanding patterns and mechanisms of forest canopy diversity and ecosystem functions in a changing world. And so they're really looking at this as a way to set the stage for the upcoming 8th International Canopy Conference, which will be held in Xishuangbanna, China, from 13th to the 16th of October. It was intended to be held last year in 2020, but of course that was canceled and postponed until the following October. So hopefully we might see some of you in the future there, or at least see your papers here in this special issue. And finally, I wanted to tell you how you can contribute. Some of you may be watching this just on the YouTube channel instead of participating in the workshop itself, but if you still want to participate, and this is also for the workshop participants, we would like you to send an email to cts.canopy@gmail.com with the following info. Please identify the problems and challenges that you've been experiencing gaining access to forest canopy in the way that's necessary for you to perform your research. And if you can pick out the top 3, that would be really great. And then also define the functional requirements that you have for that tool. What do you need it to do? How do you need it to perform? What kinds of things does it have to, not have power? Does it really have to have power? What kinds of things do you really need that tool to how do you need it to function? So if you can list those and also prioritize the top 3. And so then also include your contact info, and then tell us whether you'd be willing to lead a group on more focused discussion and development of that topic for a manuscript. We're going to be defining these topics in more detail later on. These are the kind of the major umbrellas of questions that we're asking, and then we're going to define as we identify common ground and things and identify more specific topics. So if you'd be willing to lead one of those groups, first of all, and then also if you're just generally interested in further participation and maybe contribution to an eventual manuscript. So we'd like you to provide this information by January 18th. That's next Monday, the following Monday after January 11th, which is the second workshop time. And then we'll try to respond the following week and get back to you and then start to organize those groups to continue the work. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope we have a great discussion. Thank you very much.